Jordan, I suppose one of the first things I always like to ask the people who I interview is a very broad and holistic view of what does innovation actually look like at JLL. And I'm aware this may well be sort of that JLL Asia Pacific side, but could you just give people a bit of an idea in that sense?
Sure. I mean, I alluded earlier in the intro that a few years ago, we carved out a dedicated technologies division. And so I don't think that there's one face of innovation at JLL. And this is typical of any large services firm. You know, we are an aggregate of hundreds of business lines. And now we have this technology side that, you know, it's sort of tech-led rather than sort of business process-led. And that's still a dance that I think the entire industry is learning. You know, is it a sort of process of merger and acquisition, which we've seen a lot of, especially with JLL Technologies in the last few years? Is it in-house development, which I think anytime you're a large corporation like we are, there tends to be a bit of overconfidence of your capabilities, not just internally, but even externally. People sort of overestimate. So when startups are approaching us, they might assume that, hey, just bring us in. Like as soon as your clients see us, it's off to the races, right? And it doesn't work like that. We have a lot of competing interests. Even some of the business lines, what we might call a legacy business line within JLO, they have competing interests. And one of those interests is not, hey, can this technology displace what I do, right? Yeah. That shouldn't be confused though with resistance to change. I think the way that it really works for us and the bigger mission I think that we have for innovation at JLL is not to think that we could disintermediate. I think that's a misconception across all of innovation, but rather to amplify the parts that make people the best at what they do and reduce as much tedium as possible through technologies. And that's where, you know, I think my overall approach to transformation and change really tries to start with that first, which is how do we give people better sort of digital picks and shovels to do their jobs more effectively rather than think, oh, we're just going to displace or replace them. So the best one I can point to within JLL, I think a misconception that is more from the outside, but is, you know, and a lot of technology vendors approach us with is, oh, we can eliminate brokerage. And it's like, no, you can't. This is older than the industry itself. Before we defined ourselves as a property industry and a estate industry, you need people to facilitate this because you've got to go about the rest of your life. And so you look at things like more of like an Amazon Web Services approach. How do we build, again, better tools to execute the job rather than think we're going to automate the whole thing away?
Yeah, it's a really important point. And to sort of summarize, I suppose I've always looked at that as this is less about disruption and more about innovation. And then with innovation, you've got the radical and you've got the sort of incremental innovation. And I think you're absolutely right. There is a complete and utter misconception of really what this industry is all about. And so just bringing that back a little bit, perhaps to that holistic perspective of JLL for a moment. And just for those of you who perhaps are not familiar with just how broad and large JLL is, if I'm not mistaken, Jordan, there's like 90,000 plus employees. And then within that, attitudes to innovation, I suppose started, and maybe this is more America-led than anywhere else, but you know, you were one of the founding partners of MIT's Real Estate Innovation Lab, as an example. But I just want to pick up the point that you made there about your interpretation of what it's all about. So JLL also have JLL Technologies, right? And you guys have deployed, I think, close to $350 million of capital into 40 or so startup businesses. Is that, again, is that more about innovating the space than disrupting the space, or JLL Technologies, have they got a slightly different mandate to JLL in and of itself?
So this is a distinction that I've got to put up front. You're actually talking about even one pillar of JLL Technologies, which is JLL Spark. So this is corporate venture capital.
Okay.
Now, corporate venture capital, I don't actually work for Spark. I don't work for JLL Technologies. So some of the nuances I don't want to be taken as gospel here.
Yeah.
But let's look at the wider sort of role of corporate venture capital. I think that it's R&D budgets had disappeared quite a while ago in many companies, and corporate venture capital is sort of the new way to get to the frontier for a lot of big established companies. So it is external innovation with the hopeful knock-on effect of bringing the additional revenue, or sort of the additional funds that good investing will bring in. And we at JLL Spark, we have there's very clear themes. If you go to JLL Spark's website and you check out the philosophies, it's things like ESG is at the top of the list, financial tech, construction technology, future of work, and there's one other that escapes me at the moment, but again, I don't work for Spark. I don't have to have them memorized yet. But yeah, all the numbers you spit out are correct. Some of those have led to acquisitions for the wider business. And, it is an interesting approach because, I think part of what has largely killed off R&D, unless your business is sort of founded on R&D, like, pharmaceutical companies or things like that, is that you get so big that you might have people that sort of bend your rules, but they still were forged by your rules, right? And that often doesn't breed a culture of innovation or new thinking. But I think on the other side, where you can run into trouble, and this goes back to this sort of misconception of what innovation is I think there's this overbearing notion that all innovation is good, all new ideas are good. And I think, to your point about this being American-led, I think the idea of intellectual property rights and originality stop us from just reevaluating, I think, part and parcel of existing processes. So when I talk about brokers, you're not going to disintermediate them. Again, how do you amplify what makes them great? And how do you remove tedium rather than say, okay, we built this top to bottom set of tools, take it in whole, right?
Yeah.
And so that's where the sort of process of external innovation by way of venture capital investment sort of lets it get tested outside of our environment and bring it in. And hopefully it appeals to that shiny object syndrome of, hey, I like that thing they've got, I want it for myself. That's what I think is working well, not just in our culture, but from a lot of the technological innovation of the past, I'll say 15 years.
Do you know what? I'd never really thought of it in that way, that by essentially having an entirely different identity, an entirely different, I suppose, objective, to be crass about it, you are enabling JLL to have that innovation function, which is then, I hesitate to use the word entirely complementary, but your last point there about it's enabling you to avoid that shiny object syndrome is absolutely bang on, because it means that there is a rigidity and a process around, are they the right company for us? And if they're not, they're not, right?
Well, the thing I'd add about that is the nice thing about a venture capital approach versus an R&D approach, right? R&D means you're going to have a sunk cost if it doesn't work. Venture capital can often mean that you invested in something that doesn't work for your company, but works. YouTube started as a dating site and has created an entire content creation platform, right? A lot of things aren't necessarily what they set out to be. And, being purpose designed for one thing, you watch what happens with it in the wild, and something else can happen. If it stays within the confines of a corporate R&D team, it never has the potential to be unleashed into a adjacent or even an unrelated industry. But by going through the venture capital route, which JLL Spark was the origin of JLL technology. So first Spark was formed and then sort of spun up all the technology parts into it. And I think that's a really effective way to go, because you have this innovation-led mindset coming in with it. And again, it creates new opportunity, even if it's not necessarily straight within the confines of our existing business lines.
Yeah, it's really an interesting perspective from both sides.